起立，敬礼。回坐。Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the MechaWarrior Warlord channel. Earlier today, I presented to you a brief summary and notice of tonight's subject, and that is well, it's going to be about two things. One is the imminent risk of a currency collapse in Thailand and Vietnam, and we are seeing indications of that from the background that is happening in Vietnam and Thailand. And then we're going to also analyze the reason for the background and the other uh, recent events in Southeast Asia and around the world. This is a worldwide phenomenon, and the big question is whether a currency collapse in Southeast Asia will be the end of the issue or not, as we will see. So, so this started about a few weeks ago, starting in Thailand, from the Thailand-Cambodia border crisis. But the event came from much earlier than that. As we have all been experiencing the global inflationary crisis, the energy input has increased, has inflated, so has all the commodity inputs, and that which then driving everything else. Now it is common to attribute the problem to just the debasement of the American dollars, but the problem is worldwide. So the problem is not just because of America. In fact, America has less of this issue than others because China has continued to peg their currency to the US dollar and to maintain their export advantage. And so have many other countries. And therefore, they are importing, by pegging the currency, they are importing the inflationary pressure into their own countries. And worldwide, all of the other countries have also been spending a lot of their money and printing their own currencies also as well. So it is a worldwide inflationary environment, and right now we're really just waiting to see which countries' currencies have inflated the most and who will be the first to fall apart. And right now it looks like Thailand and or Vietnam are going to be the first one to fall and to have a liquidity crisis trigger a currency collapse. And once they do, then the question is the next question becomes if the currency collapse will stop at these two countries because they are acting as pressure release valves for the rest of the world, that by pulling back capital from these two countries and perhaps a couple more after that, that there will be enough capital in all of the respective major economic powers to hold on to be able to shore up their own balances temporarily and stave off a bank run in their own respective central banking institutions, which, as we will cover, is also a big question. Now, the main geopolitical effect of of the currency crisis that we are facing. We've been facing a currency crisis for a long time. Now it's just becoming more obvious and starting to have real currency effects. Uh, but the main geopolitical effect is that it has made governments more unstable than they were before. As Night Watch, rest in peace, when he was alive, he was observing the Arabs. He was lucky enough to observe the Arab Spring in person, and he remarked that the Night Watch method has always shown that inflation, commodity-driven inflation, is very often the trigger for a regime collapse. It is usually an economic crisis of some kind that will get people out into the streets, especially for an authoritarian regime who has otherwise been has a effective uh, has effective military to back it up. Uh, for example, uh, every single country uh, during the Arab Spring and the color revolutions period, uh, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Syria, they all had effective uh, and functioning military uh, forces, yet they they all experienced significant disruption despite of the internal security forces being very effective, uh, especially Egypt. And that is because when people are hungry, when there's actual hunger, uh, and uh, when they don't have money to actually buy food, uh, that is what will motivate people to run against live gunfire, and which is what happened in Egypt and everywhere else. In Syria, they fired on the protesters, and that did not stop them from continuing to fight because they had no choice. The protesters had no choice. It was either continue fighting or go home hungry and probably die from hunger, uh, which raises a related question about what happened exactly with the Great Leap Forward in China. But I will save that for another day, another for a real deep dive into Chinese modern history. But anyway, so so the point is that inflations and economic inflation and the currency crisis will cause governments to fall, or at least a regime change of some sort. And we saw this uh, earlier uh, this year, a few months, several months ago, when Sri Lanka's government fell, and then more recently, a couple months ago, the when Bangladesh government fell. Both times they were precipitated by the inflation. So governments have been falling gradually so far already, and we are continuing to observe economic uh, crisis everywhere in the world. Uh, and here we will start with the with a protest by the yellow shirts in Bangkok. Uh, and and we can see that there were massive protests during the uh, during the leak, uh, supposedly by Cambodia, uh, but maybe by Thailand military, of the of Peto Tang's conversation with Hang Sen, and it was a massive protest by the yellow shirts, even though they the yellow shirts have always been around and was a uh, nationalist cause. The reason why they were able to have so many people come out into the streets and apparently being somewhat violent is because of the economic crisis in the background that they have been experiencing significant inflations in Thailand. Uh, However, well, the red shirts were also there, and the red shirts, in fact, were the front lines of the conflict with Thailand. Uh, we'll look at that later. But here you see uh, Japan is experiencing inflation pressures as well with the closures of the ramen shops. Uh, the the yellow shirts continues to fight for the protest. And now we are going to now this was from a couple from let's see from 2 months ago. So yes, we now know that there was a coup uh, in Thailand by the judicial system using the judicial system against Peitotang. Uh, Now there, this one is talking about Cambodia, as you can see. Uh, but the driver for the conflict of, on the Cambodian side against Thailand is also economic. That they are also experiencing uh, problems with inflation as well, and also the the Chinese have been cracking down on the scam centers in Cambodia and the rest of Southeast Asia. Uh, so there were some effects from there as well of the reduced revenues uh, going to Cambodia, Cambodian economy, and now we have been hearing reports that Iran has been having significant economic problems, and this has driven protests off and on in Iran. And if you have been paying attention, you heard about these protests, and we all know that uh, the Iranian Republican Guard, uh, IRGC, are fairly effective in conducting internal security, but the protests still happen, and they don't just come out for, say, democracy or for the feminism uh, self-expression. And those are symptoms, but the reason why they come out into the streets is because of economic pressures that young people don't have jobs and they're not making money. And now, one thing we need to remind the readers, our audience, is that with many of these countries, Egypt, Iran, the Middle East in general, and India, Pakistan, uh, Africa, uh, is that the governments are subsidizing uh, subsidizing food for the people. Everyone gets a monthly ration of of flour, oil, and maybe well, primarily flour and oil, cooking oil, and a couple other basic staples. Uh, in this comes usually in terms of a ration card that every family receive. And in Egypt, for example, they can take their flour ration and take it to the local bread bakery, and the bread bakery will return that ration to them in the form of baked bread and take a little bit of the flour in return as payment for their services. And in fact, the corner bakeries in Egypt and many other places are the distributors of the ration cards as well. Ration cards and the rations themselves. They're the endpoint of the distribution system. Philippines have government-provided rice. India has government-provided rice as well. In fact, it's still happening in India, even though the government-provided rice is rotting in the warehouse all the time. Very low-quality rice. I mean, the food is low quality in general, but this is what the government provides. And during the economic inflationary times, what always happens is the government is forced to cut back their rations because they don't have the money to pay for all of it anymore. And that in turn gets people hungry and drive them out into the streets to protest because they are not having as much rations as they used to have. And this is happening in Iran as well. Uh, Now we can see in Germany, uh, they're having stagflation. Now, one thing I recently realized is that stagflation, meaning inflation and depression at the same time, is really not it's really not inflation, because a recession, depression, is deflationary by definition. So that's overall deflation of the economy, removing currency from the system. Uh, but when, of course, prices are going up in stagflation. Well, why is that? That's because stagflation really is uh, a, a breakdown of your currency, a slow motion collapse of the currency, that the currency is losing value against everyone else. Now, in this case, like I said earlier in the beginning, the every country are facing uh, falls in currency worldwide, and it's really just seeing who's the worst off in terms of currency exchange ratios compared to everyone else. And really, we are all of the currencies are being benchmarked against against commodities. In this case, gold. Gold is the primary commodity that we are benchmarking against, because that's clearly shows uh, the fall in the value of the currencies and decreasing confidence, uh, because they're all fiat currencies now, since we don't have Deutschmarks in Germany anymore. The Coming back to inflation. Oh, now talking about benchmarking currencies against commodities, you will notice that the the petroleum prices have been fairly low and stable, stuck around the $50-$60 range. And that is because all of the countries in the Middle East are also trying to spend money. So they need to export as much as they can. There's the EU sanctions against Russian oil. Well, not EU. The UN sanctions against Russian petroleum means that the Russian Russia has been forced to sell their oil at much lower prices and undercutting everyone else, and that provides uh, a ceiling, a relative ceiling against which the all of the other OPEC countries cannot charge more than that. And of course, with the global inflation and the inflation of the US dollar, uh, and since they're trading in the US dollar, uh, they're all they have all been importing inflation from the US currency collapse, which is why another reason why if you look at just the supermarket prices in America, you don't see as much inflation as there should be uh, when there's so much US dollar going around in the economy. Anyway, uh, so Germany has been uh, spending more against their tax revenue because the German economy has been having a severe recession because of in this case, interestingly, the energy input, because they lost the Russian oil and Russian gas, so they have to import American gas at much higher prices, and that caused the German economy to not be able to produce as well. And of course, they cannot export as much to China nor the U.S. either. That has cut off significant revenues into the German economy. Uh, that is driving the recession in Germany. Now here, uh, in during the Arab Spring color revolution, Tunisia government was one of the first ones to fall, and had a peaceful transition, quote unquote, relatively peacefully to a democratic government. But now, turns out democracy was not enough. And why is democracy not enough? Because the problem is not the form of government uh, when you are dealing with the economic crisis. The the challenge is being able to resolve the economic problem effectively. And just because you're having a democracy does not mean the government stops stealing money from the people. Uh, it's a little bit less likely, but India has proven to the world how how it is possible to have democracy and still no accountability from the government to the people in terms of this rampant graft that is possible in a democratic system. And of course, in America, we had the Tammany Hall, and that was also a democratic system where uh, there was significant corruption and rent seeking. There's still quite a bit of rent seeking in America, but also a democratic government that was only accountable to a very small minority constituency. Uh, for some reason, I'm getting all these ads in in Hindi now. Uh, maybe I'm watching too much news from India. Anyway, so the point of the last video is that Singapore is also experiencing significant inflation. Uh, Thailand inflation. Uh, it's talking about the military conflict between between Thailand and Cambodia, with the continuing fighting on the front. And here, uh, Iran and Pakistan are both repatriating Afghan refugees back into Afghanistan because, and this is why they're doing it, because they are not able to feed their own people, so they definitely cannot feed the refugees anymore, and the refugees have to go home, and this is one way accountable political system uh, retrenches in when it's facing significant economic troubles to reduce the constituents that it has to support. And of course, Turkey, uh, the people are rising up against Erdogan uh, in significant part because of the inflation problem that, of course, Turkey has always had significant inflations because they they just don't care about debasing the currency, and because of that, it is actually legal in Turkey to pay for things using uh, not liras, to actually pay for things uh, with dollars and euros, because everyone knows that you cannot trust that the Turkish currency to maintain its value. But at the same time, still, even when the economy has been dollarized, so to say, they are still experiencing significant inflations in Turkey as well as everywhere else. and of course Somalia. Somalia is having the same problem, uh, and that is why the government, quote unquote, government is losing. Coalition government is losing. Uh, Even Germany is having a potential collapse. Uh, the businesses are going belly up in Singapore. Now the soybean market, uh, there are a lot of people who are trying to say in America that the Donald Trump has screwed up with a trade war with China by and therefore the American farmers are going to pay the price. That is not really true because for China to switch suppliers and get out of those contracts uh, with American farmers on the soybeans and everything else, they had to switch to a different supplier by which those other suppliers from Brazil and everywhere else, they had their own futures, their own future contracts with other people already in place, and therefore, for China to come in and take those contracts, China had to pay a little bit of premium first of all. So it's more expensive for China to try to steal contracts from other countries to buy the Brazilian and other people's soybeans. At the same time, the the American soybeans are still available, are now available on the world market. The commodities are fungible. Soybeans are soybeans no matter where they're coming from. So eventually the market will clear. They will be able to sell soybeans to somebody. They may have to take a little bit of time before they sell them. Uh, the futures market, especially in soybeans and other Chicago commodities, are the the prices are uh, notoriously unstable and have you have a lot of short-term effects such as uh, oil oil futures going negative, and in this case, soybeans going very close to the floor. But they will correct eventually. But again, this is actually a good news story in terms of the global commodities inflation. Uh, Ethiopia and Eritrea are preparing to fight a war again because of the economic collapse. South Africa is South Africa has lots and lots of problems, but one of them is the global inflation. Now, of course, the Russian-Ukraine war with the loss of what was it? With the loss of the potash fertilizers and the other fertilizers coming out of Russia and the Ukraine, as well as the wheat coming out of Ukraine and partly Russia. That's another driver for global inflation continuing. Uh, and now we're coming down to Indonesia. Uh, 1 month ago, uh, going down the road, with Indonesia, and as you can see, uh, Bolivia is also having protest problems. And see. So about a month ago, August 15th, Bolivia is having, I mean, Indonesia is starting to have the protests. Uh, Bolivia, Thailand. So the point of going to all these other countries other than Southeast Asia is to demonstrate the possibilities of the currency problems worldwide, and we shall see very soon which other countries will follow the example of Thailand and Vietnam. Now, of course, Bangladesh now they had a political solution. But in this case, we noticed that the regime change was a political solution, but it did not resolve the economic problem. Now, of course, we have the the inventor of the uh, microfinancing now in charge in Bangladesh, but whether he understands the problem, that's a separate question. It is usually politicians usually do not recognize economic problems. Uh, they see everything through a political lens, uh, except for Donald Trump, the greatest president alive, uh, who actually understand economic problems. Uh, Now we see that Pakistan has problems as well. Uh, Sri Lanka continues, even though they had a regime change. They're still having problems, uh, and now 3 weeks ago, August 30th, uh, seems like just yesterday that they started shooting people in the streets in Indonesia, and because this was an economic-driven protest, that did not stop the protesters from staying in the streets and fighting the security forces. And therefore, right afterward, and of course the delivery driver who got ran over by the police, and therefore the day after August 30th, the Indonesian president Prabowo immediately tried to appease the protesters. Both he did two things. He tried to defuse the immediate trigger of the protesters by uh, addressing the economic concerns, such as uh, the pay and the perks for the parliament, and number two, the economic assistance to the people. So that was good that uh, Indonesia actually tried to address the economic problem, that the economic trigger of the protest, which is why Indonesia has been able to temporarily push back the protests for now. Uh, it seems like the protests it may be continuing, but it's very difficult to get good quality information. Uh, and definitely the protesters are not protesting in uh, in the in the capital city anymore, but it seems like their protest continues in the periphery. And as Nightwatch again has observed, uh, regime change usually happens from the periphery. A credible regime change will happen from the periphery toward the center, that they will build up the strength in the countryside following Mao dictates. And then eventually, after they build up sufficient forces, and then they move on into toward the capital city. It is whenever you see, as we mentioned before, whenever you see a protest try to start from the capital city, that's usually a conflict between the elites. Well, it's definitely the conflict from the elites with very little support from the grassroots, from the people, and therefore it is unlikely such uh, top-down uh, regime change is unlikely to endure. It does not have staying power, whereas uh, a grassroots disaffection in this case the way the dynamic is that it starts from the grassroots discontent and protest, and then the elites, some factions of the elites, then ally with the people, with the grassroots, with the disaffected. That's when you have some defections from the military and police as well, from the security forces, and that's when they have the guns. The protesters then have enough military power to confront the central government. And in this case, Indonesia has now, because of the way Prabowo diffused the immediate conflict, the protests are now becoming more low-graded, uh, more of a long-term problem. He now has space to address the economic issues and also to try to rein in defections from the Indonesian elite. The question with Indonesia is whether any of the ethnic minorities will try to piggyback on the uh, economic uh, economic protest to drive up nationalism for their own ethnicities. And once that does happen, then we should, and it's very likely to happen, that Indonesia has significant ethnicity problems since it is a multi-ethnic society. So once that does happen, uh, we will probably see some kind of insurgencies flare out very soon in Indonesia, uh, with and of course with a corresponding military conflict. Now we switch to Vietnam. Uh, Again, that's happened during this time period, uh, and this is what the currency issue that we're talking about. So several commenters, including Duong here, and the many Western commentators out of Thailand, have addressed this issue. So Vietnam and Thailand recently passed uh, new banking acts, which uh, try to address the significant money laundering problem. The problem was that a lot of people have set up bank accounts in Vietnam and in Thailand to first of all to for money laundering, and secondly, they were because of the scam operations of the Cambodia and the rest of Southeast Asia, uh, they were they were setting up bank accounts in Vietnam and Thailand as well to support to move their currencies around to move their income, uh, and also because they were operating in that area, they were also trying to scam people in Thailand and in Vietnam, collateral damage, as you say, and so the Banking Act tried to stop the uh, the significant currency transactions of these accounts. They were trading dollars into local currencies, Baht uh, whatever they're using in Vietnam, and and then back, and therefore they were freezing these accounts and requiring the the account owners to come in to verify identities. And even today, we haven't heard very much from Vietnam since the initial report 3 weeks ago. But in Thailand, they're still having significant problems. And once you start closing some accounts, you start freezing some accounts, other people start getting worried and try to uh, hedge against the problem by start taking some money out, and that is how you start the bank run. And we can see that that's what has started happening in Thailand, and we'll get to that very quickly, very soon. And and now we see this is Africa is because of the global inflation problem, currency problem, is now can having debt issues. September report from September 6th by DW. DW has been very good at reporting global issues. Uh, Now PBS is kind of slow, but this was from September 7th. There were still some protests happening in Indonesia. Uh, and now we see Nepal, now catching up to the story in Nepal. I don't need to remind everyone what happened in Nepal. They shot 14 people, and then the protesters overran the military and enacted regime change. Definitely with some elite support, perhaps with some military support that we haven't heard about yet. Uh, and now the reason why we want to this is I said that the currency collapse is can maybe spreading out to throughout the rest of the world is because uh, there are problems with France and England. Used to be that when, well, I mean, back in during the 20th century and even in the late 1990s, uh, when when there are debt problems with the former colonial possessions of England and France, such as African Africa and in Asia, uh, England and France were the British Empire, Great Britain and France were backstopping a significant amount of these countries, their former colonial possessions debts, government borrowing to keep up to prop up the government. This this is a so-called white man's burden that uh, they they were still practicing back then. Since the 1990s, since in the 21st century, all the former colonial possessions have uh, diverged further and further away. So they are no longer supporting them as much. And recently we saw that Mali has kicked out France as well as several other uh, French and several other countries in African countries kick out the French uh, French garrison. Uh, of course, at the same time, France is having a fiscal problems as well, and they can hardly pay to support anybody, yeah, in Africa, uh, which is again earlier why the African governments are having a liquidity crisis as well. Pakistan, now Pakistan is in deep trouble, but China uh, has a, China has taken the role to backstop the Pakistani economy. And as we saw recently, Saudi Arabia is stepping up as well, probably in exchange for a real nuclear umbrella as opposed to before. In Nepal, definitely the army stood back for from part of the protest, uh, allowing the protesters uh, to take over some of the government. Bangladesh, again, Bangladesh is that they have lost significant amount of money. And now, 12 days ago, September 12th, they're now talking about the government takeover in Nepal. Uh, Nepalese government has fallen, and now one of the first reports on Thailand. the Thailand's bank, uh, September 13th, Thailand banks are being frozen. This Ashley's documentary is trying is portraying the Indonesian government, Indonesian protest as potential avenue for change, but we shall see. Again, like I said, uh, right now the protest is kind of simmering out, but they are probably regrouping. When the protest reach this kind of stage, the cadres and it starts to diverge into two parts. Some people go home, and other people continues and become more hardcore, become more radicalized, and that is what is going to happen in Indonesia. And like I said again, the various ethnic minorities will uh, start to exploit this crisis as well. So it will become more kinetic. That is almost guaranteed. Uh, unless the economy significantly improves in the short term, which is not happening. Uh, Not when there's global instability, including Kenya. And now, 9 days ago, September 15th, we are now seeing reports that the bank run has started in Thailand. And of course, even in Northern Ireland, they are rioting in Ireland as well. France, and here we're just going to point out that Thailand is officially a bank. Of, Officially, it's a semi banking semi holiday, real holiday for many of them. Uh, and interestingly, Peru in South America is having a crisis, having protests because again, people are not getting paid. The government workers are not getting paid. There's significant economic problems. Sudan. Uh, this is a follow-up on the protest in Peru. Uh, France has a change in government. We shall see how it is. Macron is unlikely to survive. They really need to have a new election if they want to have a more stable government. Otherwise, the whole country is just going to be paralyzed for the rest of the year. And now we see reports that Indonesia President Prabowo is going to try to take money from the billionaires to fund his economic assistance. Again, that's when when the government is having fiscal problems, like in faced with all these countries, they have to get money from somewhere. And obviously, they cannot get money from the grassroots because that is why the grassroots are protesting the proletariat, and therefore they have to start taking money the from the capitalists, from the billionaires. It's really more symbolic than effective. It helps some with the overall government shortfall, but it's not going to be enough. Not however much they can get out of the billionaires. But it will show that the whole country is sharing in the economic pain. Of course, whether the Chinese billionaires of Indonesia and the Indonesian billionaires are willing to stick around to pay for the economic assistance, that's a totally different question, and that can trigger elite defection to the protesters if Prabowo was not effective in getting money out of them. Of course, the French yellow vests are protesting against austerities. Uh, and here is a report analyzing the inflation 5 days ago of the Thailand baht that just points again to the inflation problems and the bank holiday. Uh, and there's a follow up on the yellow shirts. The leaders were finally acquitted officially. Now Manila is also having protests, uh, anti-corruption protests. Uh, so a few days ago, the this protest, this report on Indonesia, I'm not sure how current it is. It seems to be a report just summarizing what happened before. And here, the Indians are somewhat recognizing the problems all around them. Of course, India is having its own economic problem. It's officially in a recession right now. Who knows? The inflation problems will catch up with them too. Uh, but in this particular report, now the Philippine anti-corruption protest, they say that they're talking about political reforms, but the problem is not a political problem; it's an economic problem again. So they're almost definitely not going to be able to fix the problems in the Philippines. Uh, People will continue to protest. They just wouldn't know what they're protesting for. Anyway, this guy is thinking this is a demographic problem, and demography, even though now it's very popular, is not really the answer. And here's just continuing all the other problems, uh, economic problems, the global economic problem. And here, uh, that the digital nomads in Bali, uh, that's just contributing to the popular disaffection over there. Uh, the the gentrification, political discontent. And here we see that that is a report of a bank run, that they're emptying bank accounts. And now in Thailand, the Thai government are now talking about opening up accounts so that people can inject liquidity by taking money out of the banks. Uh, and that is not going to solve the problem. With fiat currencies, which is the case for everybody now, almost everybody. With fiat currencies, most of the economy is run on, it's no longer running on the currency itself, but on debt. Debt is the majority of the economy currency. So taking money out of the bank is actually deflationary because then the banks will have to call in all of their debts to pay for the cash to give out to people because otherwise uh, with with fractional reserve banking most of the banks are uh, currencies are loaned out to everybody else. That's how they make money to pay for the interest payments on their accounts. And when people take money out of the banks, then the banks have to start calling in the loans, which will then trigger all these other entities who have also loaned out money, including to other banks and to their suppliers to call in the loans as well, calling loans from their customers with the vendor financing, and the cascading effect would be all these loans becoming zeroed out, and therefore destroying currency, destroying the overall money supply in the economy. So, coming back to what uh, Vietnam and Thailand have are already experiencing bank runs. So very soon, in the very near future, within a couple months, if not sooner, maybe within a couple weeks, uh, they can't. It's very likely for them to experience a currency collapse. And once they do, we see that England and France already are having problems with their debt financing, national debt financing. So that is removing response capacity from IMF and World Bank to deal with this. Now, recently, yesterday, uh, President Trump has pledged American support of bailout, semi-bailout of Argentina, and to backstop their uh, uh, liquidity problem, liquidity crisis. By backstopping Argentina, America reduces capacity to respond to other liquidity crises around the world. So, who is going to backstop Thailand and Vietnam? Vietnam may be able to get away with a bank holiday because they are still nominally communist, but Thailand is not. So it is a dictatorship, but they're not very effective at controlling the economy. So the backstop will probably have to be Japanese. Uh, Maybe the Chinese will try to backstop Thailand as well. Thailand has a pretty good relationship with China now, but I'm not sure they'll even they may not have a choice to ask ask America for help. But again, America American capacity to respond right now is less, and so unless China respond effectively, Thailand, the Thai baht will collapse. Uh, the only question is how well China can support that. And then once China paid out the money to support Thailand again, they will have even less capacity to support uh, the for Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. I think China is supporting part of that, and then IMF slash Great Britain is supporting the rest of it. So the system, global system, uh, the global currency system is becoming very strained. Uh, Thailand has faces significant near-term risk for currency collapse, uh, depending on the effect of Chinese support. The I don't know. It is difficult to see who else will be the first shoe to drop, and the currency collapse. There are two potential models. One is that it's going to be a domino. One falls, dragging down the other, and then another uh, until they were able to contain the crisis or not. Uh, Full global uh, collapse, uh, which was almost the case in the late 1990s when Thailand again collapsed because the significant devaluations all across Southeast Asia, uh, including Korea, uh, only by only by luck were all the other countries are able to pull out of the currency problem. It is difficult to say, very difficult to say if that would be remain the case. It was almost a complete domino. Uh, the But the other potential model is that as capital fly out of the countries with liquidity problems, because again, it's the rich people that were able, the capitalists that were able to, that will be able to stay ahead of the collapse as they continue to withdraw capital from more and more countries. As eventually they achieve a capitalization ratio at some point uh, with the rest of the world that they are able to contain and backstop the currency collapses. So that's the pressure release valve theory, that the uh, the collapse of currency will help chase out the bad debt, uh, leaving only good debt behind, and eventually they'll be able to contain the crisis. Uh, Usually, it's the bad debt that chases out the good debt, but in the pressure relief model, the bad debt the bad debt gets chased out first, leaving only the good debt behind. So we shall see. Uh, Going through the recent list of economic reports, uh, as shown in that list of videos, it looks like it's unlikely for France to have a banking holiday. So it will probably be Peru. It looks like it's going to be one of the first after Thailand, maybe Indonesia. Well, maybe, uh, but we shall see. Until then, keep an eye out, everyone, and hopefully you guys will be able to come through this economic crisis relatively unscathed. Good luck, everyone. MechaWarrior, Warlord out.